Hello friends. Today I am going to tell you an interesting story about the movie All Quiet on the Western Front. As the First World War entered its fourth year in the spring of 1917, 17-year-old Paul Baumer joined the Imperial German Army along with his schoolmates, Albert Kropp, Franz Müller, and Ludwig Bem. They were inspired by a stirring speech from a school official and received uniforms from soldiers who had lost their lives in earlier battles, unaware of the significance. After being sent to northern France, close to La Malmaison, they met and formed a bond with the older soldier, Stanislaus Kaczynski. However, their naive and idealistic views of the war were quickly shattered by the harsh realities of trench warfare on the Western Front, and Ludwig was killed in a nighttime artillery attack. On November 7, 1918, German official Matthias Erzberger, exhausted by the increasing casualties, holds a meeting with the German High Command to advocate for starting armistice negotiations with the Allied powers. At the same time, Paul and Kat steal a goose from a farm and plan to share it with Albert, Franz, and Jaden Stackley, with whom they have grown close during their time behind the front lines in Champagne. Kat, unable to read, asks Paul to read a letter from his wife and expresses his fear about adapting to civilian life. Franz, meanwhile, spends the night with a French woman and brings back a scarf as a souvenir. On November 9th, General Friedrichs transports Erzberger and the German delegation to the forest of Campine by train to negotiate a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Paul and his friends embark on a mission to locate 60 missing recruits who were sent to bolster their unit, only to find out they had been killed by gas after removing their masks prematurely. Friedrichs, being opposed to the negotiations, commands an attack before French reinforcements arrive. Later that night, Erzberger's delegation arrives at the forest of Campine, while Paul's regiment is dispatched to the front to prepare for attacking the French lines. On November 10th, the Supreme Allied Commander, Ferdinand Foch, gives the Germans a strict ultimatum of 72 hours to accept the Allied terms without any possibility for negotiation. Meanwhile, the German forces launch an attack, gaining control of the French front line after intense hand-to-hand combat, but are ultimately defeated by a powerful counterattack that employs a combination of Saint-Chamond tanks, airplanes, and flamethrowers. Franz becomes separated from his group, and Albert is killed while attempting to surrender, trapped in a crater in no man's land with a French soldier. Paul tragically kills him and is filled with remorse and regret, asking for forgiveness from the dead soldier's body. In the evening, Erzberger receives news of Kaiser Wilhelm II's abdication and is given instructions by Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg to accept the Allied terms. Paul returns to his unit and witnesses his comrades celebrating the impending end of the war. He finds a wounded Jaden, who gives him Franz's scarf. Paul and Kat try to help Jaden, but he is overcome by the trauma of his injuries and takes his own life. At around 5 a.m. on November 11th, Erzberger and his delegation put their signature on the armistice, which is set to take effect at 11 a.m. Upon learning of the ceasefire, Paul and Kat decide to steal from the farm one last time, but tragedy strikes when Kat is shot by the farmer's young son. Paul desperately tries to save him by carrying him to the hospital, but Kat dies. Friedrichs, determined to end the war with a German victory, gives orders for an attack to commence at 10:45. I deeply sorrowful and battle-worn, Paul kills many French soldiers before being killed by a bayonet seconds before 11 o'clock, when the fighting abruptly stops, and the front falls eerily silent. Shortly after, a newly arrived German recruit, whom Paul had saved in battle, finds Paul's mud-caked body and retrieves Franz's scarf that was passed on to Paul from Jaden.